real quick disclaimer, mechanics are super important, and there are a lot of awesome videos on the mechanics of characters. We might talk a little bit about mechanics, but this video is not a how-to on how to make a character using a rule set. This is an exploration of how to make cool characters with deep motives that can tell interesting stories. So we just wanted to let you know that up front, but I know that you're going to love it, so stay tuned. So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors, and we are going to walk through how to build a compelling character, just narratively, coming up with like really cool, interesting characters that are fun to play. And I'm going to start off by giving you, I'm going to lay it out there, and this is my admission. I'm guilty, and my characters for the last 5 years are people that I have ripped straight from a movie, and that is where I start, and then they grow from there. So in the first session, I am playing another character, and that is how I've done it. My character in the Provoker Season 2 is Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy. My character from Winds of Sir Celine is Martin Freeman's Bilbo Baggins from the Hobbit movies. And then Durgan is probably the exception because I just played essentially a tropey dwarf, but still it was kind of like playing sort of a Gimli, like, and then putting a spin on it. That's my secret. It's out there. That's how I start, is with that concept. Like, oh man, I'm really digging this show. I'm going to play. So as an example, if I was going to make a character right now, I would make a character based off of Thomas Shelby from a show called Peaky Blinders. And that's how I would start. Like, cool. I even have photos pulled up of the character when I'm role-playing the first session because I'm trying to think of how they would talk and all that stuff. And then by the second, third, and fourth sessions, it's its own totally separate character. In some cases, in a Lore Keepers game, I actually used... My character's name was like something Raylan. And the character I was based it on was Raylan Givens from Justified. And if you look at my character art, it's Timothy Olyphant's photoshopped face on my character. So, shameless, but it works really well for me. That's it. That's my confession.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've known a lot of people who have done that to their varying degrees, maybe not to that extent or even to greater extent, where it's just a pure caricature start to finish, from session 1 all the way to the end or whatever. But like it's so foreign to the way that I would ever like make a character, which is like, it's always interesting to me, like kind of the starting points that people take towards these sorts of things. Because the idea of like stealing another person and like working from that is like, it doesn't even come to mind as like, oh, I might do that. Like, it's just like, I would never. So for me, usually the inciting thing for my characters is usually some sort of struggle that they basically are going to be experiencing, and that struggle is going to kind of be the basis around which the rest of the character starts to come into play. So for example, like there's a character that I'm going to be playing in Matt Click is running a Star Wars game on his channel that I'm going to be playing in, and the very first thing that I thought of for that character once I knew the concept is like, this person has just become a Jedi Knight, and then Order 66 happens. Like, boom. Like, literally, like, 3 days after he's, like, official, And just the sort of, like, horror that would, like, put upon you of, like, working towards something your entire life, moment from birth until now, has all been to get to this goal, and then that rug is just pulled out from under you. And it's just everything you worked for is gone in an instant. What would that do to you? Like, how would you act in that sort of scenario? Like the sort of like loss of purpose, the sort of devastation and trauma of, having so much of your life and identity like ripped away from you. And I think like that sort of thing is like a really interesting thing, a really interesting question to have hanging over a character. And like, so that was everything that I've built about that character is kind of centered around that question. And I've played like almost all of my characters have something like that as their starting point. You've just, switched into being this thing instead of that thing. Like, how is that growing pain going to affect you? You used to have this past, now you want to be this person. how are those things going to pull against you, of like habit versus intent and like things like that. So my starting point for a character is almost always some sort of either moral or emotional struggle that's going to kind of be the core of them exploring and figuring out themselves throughout the course of the game, and having the ideal be at the end of the game having answered that question in some sort of interesting way.
That's awesome. I just real quick wanted to say Order 66, for anyone who doesn't know, Star Wars is basically when the Emperor says, all right, all clone troopers, Order 66. And they know, like, secretly it means, hey, it's time to kill all the Jedi. And so that, I just wanted to, because that's a really powerful character, but in case anybody didn't recognize the frame of reference, I didn't want to have to, like, pause it and go. So that's Order 66.
The way I make my characters is also very exploratory, but the way I do it is I start. It's funny because I don't know how I start. Usually there's like something where I go, maybe people decided, oh, I'm going to do this and that. So I think, oh, I'm going to play, I was going to say Ranger, but I'll play a Ranger, we'll say. And from there, I start going, okay, I'll just flip through the races and kind of wait until something catches my eye and go, oh, maybe it's a Dwarf Ranger. And I might see a picture or something. And then as I go, the previous decisions that I've made, that technically I haven't made, really something just piqued my interest, continue to inform all of the rest of the decisions. So it's almost a weird sort of cyclical thing where at no point, it's paradoxical. I don't feel like at any point I'm really making any decisions, but obviously at some point I have to decide. But the example I use is, okay, then I've gotten enough where I know my race and my class and my ability scores. So I know whether or not I'm strong or not. And then I start to apply these scores to the character. So if I'm not that strong, well, maybe I'm a little bit older. Or, if I'm very dexterous, maybe I'm more wiry and lanky. I just start thinking, I come up with those things down to the point where, would this character that did X, Y, and Z, that is lanky, that is this, wield an axe or a sword? I don't really think of it mechanically. I just think, well, which one would they have picked up? Would they be better at animal handling or intimidation? Oh, well, they probably were, in the military, so maybe intimidation's more their thing than the animal handling. And I just slowly find those things, and it's almost like I'm allowing the character to take shape, which then when I go to play them, continues the same thing. But it creates a really interesting thing where at one point I was playing World of Warcraft and I thought, why would anybody pick these ugly character options? Why would you make your character an old man? This was probably 15 years ago. I was pretty young. And then one day I was like, oh, but what if I was an old man? I picked like this really old man orc face and these like long, like white hair. And there's not really any role playing in that game, certainly not on the server I was on, but suddenly I was this old man rogue that's just had enough, and he's just like craggy face. And it opened up the world to me. Now when I make characters in RPGs, I'm like, I just look through the options and go, oh, maybe I'm that guy. Maybe I'm that girl. Maybe my hair is long. Maybe it's short. Why? I just let it kind of decide. And I don't know, to me, it makes really compelling characters because it constantly makes me ask questions because I don't feel like I really made any decisions.
Yeah, it's always so interesting to me to see like the ways. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. I was just going to say, it dawned on me now that based on titling and the subject, I'd like to record a sort of a precursor that we should put before it that basically says what you said before we started, which is, I don't want people to think that this is a video on how to make a character mechanically.
Yeah.
Specifically saying that up front. And I think if you just tack it on as like a thing where it's like, hey guys, this is a video, da, 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 and then it fades out, and then it fades up with our actual intro. I think we could stand to benefit from that, if you're cool with it. Because it dawned on me when he started mentioning mechanics, I was like, oh yeah. We did talk about how this wasn't mechanics, so I'll just do a quick, if it's cool with you, I'll just do like a quick like intro, and then you can just put it, so.
Yeah, it's always just so interesting to me to like see like the different like ways that people start to like build their characters out from, and like how that can kind of create so many different scenarios. But I think, James, you touch on a really interesting point there of like, for me, the most interesting characters when it comes to like narrative and storytelling stuff, it's always about questions. So I think the fact that you kind of base that on where you start to come from with your characters, I think is a very valuable sort of point of being able to ask like, why are they like this? Like it's one thing just to say this is the sort of person that they are, but then to start to like unpack that and say why, what life experience has informed this behavior? Are they acting this way because this element in their past has sort of forced them to that, or is this something new that sort of like caused them to question what they used to know? And like once you can start to break down of like, so I think that this is the sort of person that I want to be. That can be a useful starting point, you know. But once you start to then question that of like, okay, so but why are they this sort of person? You know, what things in their life have brought them here, and what are they trying to do? What are they trying to become? Like, what sorts of struggles in their life are they trying to resolve, and how does that inform their behavior? Like those, I think, can lead to some of the most interesting characters, because it basically builds an automatic character arc for you in advance of like, I'm starting at this point and I know I want to make it. I don't necessarily know where the end point of that arc is going to go, but I know it's going to go somewhere because it's important to the character and how they act. And those sorts of arcs can, you know, that's obviously a huge part of story in general, is like, you know, you start conflicted and you end resolved. And the more I think that you can start to build that into your character, even if it's just by asking why, or like setting out with a struggle in mind from the start, that those are the sorts of things that will like automatically sort of funnel you down an interesting path, as long as you keep asking those questions and looking for answers.
Yeah, and I think so for me, I want to make this clear too, because what you're saying is where I'm at now. I haven't played in a campaign in a little while. So the actual games that people are running have evolved. That's one of the virtues of being part of a community, is that the community goes through phases. And when these campaigns that I described to you started, we weren't putting up interest posts about a specific game that explored a specific theme that was setting out to tell a specific story. It was more, it honestly was very much kind of building it as you go. So when people would post a game, they're like, hey, I want to run a game in my world, and it's this world called Aeronoth, and it's, you know, okay, cool. And that way, the method that I was describing was without any real reference points. And so, Jeff, I can completely understand what you mean by like, well, that would sort of seem foreign to me, because it would seem foreign to me based on the current climate of interest posts and the games that are being run in the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. I think that we've sort of, it has become more refined in the way that it's presented, because we've figured out the kinds of stories we want to tell, or at least explore. It wasn't always the case. It wasn't, and that's not bad. It's just kind of cool to see people have built-in themes and like word lists of what might be in the game, kind of like evocative terms. I would build a character very differently. And what I find myself doing is, in your example of the Star Wars game, like where Order 66 just happened, I would probably do something in the same way that you did, where I'd say, well, what is the most interesting facet of that to me? And so, you know, in that game, I would probably play a character like you mentioned, where someone who just started, and starting with this concept is way easier when you know the kind of game it is. So if I know this game is about horror and existential terror and not being able to survive, what I would probably do is choose immediately, just a character popped in my head. Like literally while I was talking, I would choose a traumatized detective who probably lost some people very close to them. And then what I would do throughout the whole thing is I would start playing this character where they are seeing the people that they lost manifested, basically telling them how they failed and kind of going over. And my arc that I would kind of have mentally is I would say, all right, eventually those things would either start disappearing or I'd start seeing them for what they are. And I would try to find closure or not, depending on the bent of the game. But I wouldn't go, what character from a show? I'm going to play Wolverine from X3 specifically. You know, like, which would be the worst Wolverine to choose. But I just wanted to point that out because as you were speaking, I was like, I don't do that anymore. I would if you hit me with a generic world. Hey, we're playing in the world, and not that the world was generic, but a generic concept for a game. If you said to me, hey, I'm playing in this world that I'm building, you know, it's called Glyph, I'd go, cool. And I'd probably pick someone from a TV show. You know what I mean? Versus I'm going to run a corporate espionage game, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that is an important point to make, because I will say, I guess just for people watching who may not be as familiar, like the games that I tend to run and play in are the sorts of things that Tim described there, of like, we're playing in this world with this idea, exploring these themes with this sort of feel, like very, very defined, which I think, as Tim says, does lend itself towards more broad, esoteric character creation, versus if you have nothing at all to go off of and it's just like, want to play a game? Sure, let's play a game. What are you going to play? And like, so the games that you play in, I think, can definitely inform your process, because that's something that I didn't even think of just like the way that I play is very, very specific, and that might not be all or even most people's experiences, and that definitely informs my process in a different way than, like you say, of just like, here's a world, do something with it. Like that, it can be difficult to latch on to very specific evocative elements if you don't know what those elements are and if they're going to come up in the game or not.
I also think, especially almost in between those things, I do in a more roundabout way something similar to what Tim described as far as choosing a character, because it's almost weird to describe, but the idea is when I say that I'm not making the decisions, what I think is happening is when I see a specific set of circumstances and then need one more thing. So like I said, a dwarf fighter with high strength, a picture just pops into my head, just like Tim said, where it's like, oh, he immediately knew who he wanted to play in that game when you described it. To me, that is all of my experiences in the past, kind of through pattern recognition to some degree. My brain goes, okay, the next logical step is X. Like you said, traumatized detective, for some reason, was your brain's next logical step because you saw a specific show and a movie and read a book, and basically your whole life up to that point technically led to that decision, where given this set of things, what is, the unknown? That's making the character, but we're all drawing from somewhere. And I feel like it's a bit of a spectrum of, well, I don't know anything, so I'm going to be Raylan Givens, and we're just going to see where that leads us, because that's just the starting point. You don't go, well, Raylan in the show would do this, so I'm going to, that's just like this is where I started. That's my template. And then that's when you start filling stuff in, right? Your Google Doc template still has that you graduated high school in 1968 at a fake high school. And when you play the game, you delete that part and go, no, he graduated from this high school. And he doesn't have any work experience because I'm 18 years old making a resume. But so it's that idea where it's kind of the same thing, but my description almost seems a little more holistic. I don't know if there's a better word to use there, but it's almost like I'm doing the same thing. I'm just letting my brain tell me what it is. But your brain is going to tell you different things, Yeah,
and it's important. If you use that method, I highly recommend you don't tell anybody, because they won't know. Nobody knows. I sound nothing like Timothy Oliphant. I'm doing this like my variation. Now, I'm also a role player who can do voices. I just happen to be able to do that. If you can't do voices, it doesn't matter. But a lot of the things that the character informs is my voice. But if you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to play Jaime Lannister, then don't tell anyone at the table, and they'll just think you have this really cool, well-developed character in mind, or not. But the point is, don't say, hey, I'm playing, because what that's going to do is immediately, I think, shortchange your opportunity to explore something and be something and create something new. You don't want them to turn around and go, wait, so like they will take everything from the world and be like, well, where's your brother and your sister and have you been to Casterly Rock? And you're like, no. Vaguely, archetypically, Jaime Lannister. I'm not literally Jaime Lannister, but a lot of people can't. So if you use that method, keep it here, keep it locked away, and then it'll slowly fade away anyway.
So you said something really interesting there that I don't want to get just glossed over, because it's something that I didn't even consciously think that I also do a lot. And you said that you have a sort of knack, whether that's something you've developed or just have, of doing voices, and that informs the sorts of characters that you play because of how your voice interacts with the character. and I do the same thing, but with other things. So for me, I'm confident in my ability to like act, but I don't do voices. Like almost all my characters just have my voice, and I feel good about portraying emotion or whatever and things like that. But other parts of my life that I am good at and am interested in almost always find ways to seep into my character because I can bring nuance to those things that other people might not be able to bring. So, for example, almost all of my characters across the board, like nearly 100%, have either an artistic or a spiritual pursuit that they're invested in. So they have some sort of music that they're involved with. They have they paint. They are interested in alchemy. Like there's almost always some sort of thing, a craft or a knowledge system that they want to explore, because that's something that I, as a person, do a lot. Like I have a lot of artistic things that I'm involved with. I sing, I play music. I'm really interested in things like religious frameworks and things like that, just as a person. So I find myself bringing those things into characters because I can sort of add a spice to them through those things that other people might not necessarily be able to do because they don't have the same familiarity with them. So it's definitely okay, and I think good even, to let your skill sets like seep into your characters because it'll make them more interesting and more deep in a way that people without those skill sets wouldn't be able to do. So Tim's characters are almost always going to have more dynamic voices than my characters because he's good at voices and I'm not. Where, there might be something else that I can really lean into for my characters that Tim wouldn't necessarily be able to dive into. And there is something to be said for like playing characters who are not like you. But I think that there's also something very important to be said for putting the things that you know best into your characters, because it'll add a sort of like mystical quality to that character that can't be simplified down in the way that somebody else trying to do that same element might have to do to include it.
That brings up a really important concept, which is I've used the word templates a few times. So, right, Tim, you sort of choose a template in some cases and work from it. Or like I said, I find something based on which decisions I want to be the trophy decision or not, for example. The important thing about what you said, Jeff, is even though all of your characters might have shared those things, or even though all of Tim's characters might have dynamic voices, that doesn't mean that they seem similar at all. There are so many facets that make up a character that choosing that, especially if you don't tell someone, choosing the Jaime Lannister starting point or anything, my way, where I'm like, I kind of have this starting point, it then allows you to think of what decisions they might make, and then from there decide whether it's the one you want or not. So taking the example of Jaime Lannister, if you've seen Game of Thrones, especially early seasons, not a super nice guy, to put it lightly. And the idea is that if you choose this Jaime Lannister, you might take the cockiness from him. But when it comes to make an evil decision, you're not like, well, I am Jaime Lannister, so I'm going to do X. You are instead going, oh, well, he would probably do this in this situation, but I am specifically making this decisions because this is where I'm diverging. Simply starting with some sort of context allows you to make more informed decisions, because I would be less likely to give my character maybe one of those artistic pursuits that Jeff's very comfortable with, because I'm not as comfortable with it. It's just that if I work with what I'm good at or what I have a lot of knowledge of, the character is always going to come across as more fully formed than if I said, well, my character's a philosophy major, and then every time it comes up, I don't know anything about philosophy. It's going to seem like a really two-dimensional character because it can never be that good at the thing that it's supposed to be the best at. So I think just that idea of the shared context and of the template, but breaking out of it, deciding where to break from it and where to keep with it is really the whole game for me.
I've also seen people who, and I encourage this, I'm going to use your philosophy example there and just say, if you don't know philosophy, the beauty of being able to role play is you can describe that something happened and it doesn't have to be played out. So it's also cool to see, and I have seen, they say something that leans on an ancient philosophy that's sort of, and you kind of can just exposit. Like, oh, they quote a famous philosopher and they mention this adage about, when you start something too quickly and how it goes wrong. I love that because it allows me to be what I'm not. So if I'm not a philosopher or whatever. So James, I totally agree with you. And I do what Jeff says, where I tend to play characters that lean more on like you said, like speaking, you know what I mean? Because that comes very naturally to me, and like, surprised is so it's like, so I am like, hey, I'm going to play a character who's all talky. -1, I actually played a character in Jake Norman's Mummy Lord game where I thought this was an interesting concept because it was the opposite. I only said 3 words. I was a gnoll that could say blades, claws, and fangs. And so I kept saying those 3 words with different inflection in different ways. And it actually was a really interesting study in communication in A Tomb of a Mummy Lord. But in the same way that you can lean on what you're good at, it also can be fun in the right setting with the right people to do something you're not good at and be like, oh, and then I use some sort of a cool equation to da-da-da-da. And it's like, I'm fine at math, but I'm certainly not using equations to do anything. So that's just another tip too, is you can exposit, and that's the beauty of role-playing. Like, I say something really smooth to the guard. The game master might make you play that out, but if you kind of are on the level, go, hey, listen, I'm not a talker, but I'd like to role-play one, you could just say, hey, yeah, and they say something really smooth, and I would totally be into that. So
I think another important thing about that specifically is that not only can you exposit it, but you can also workshop it. So you say, I say something really smooth, and then you guys talk about what that would be. And then it happens, and then your character came off as smooth. And then in that sort of same respect, that idea that it fits into just about any world. Because if I'm playing in Dragon Grid and I don't know that much about it, I can mention that I use some sort of adage that people would use. And it still comes across as fine, but I don't have to know it. And it may not even exist. And that sort of leeway allows you to really play any character you want and be compelling, just as long as you're willing to embrace that you don't have to know everything and do everything and be good at everything your character's good at.
I've seen that actually play through a whole campaign. That actually happened in one of our games where you were like, hey, we use an adage that would mean it's on the surface things are okay, but underneath it's not. And we kind of workshopped what it might be and came up with a couple. And then I think one sort of stuck. And then for the next few sessions, it was referred back to as this kind of shared reference point of like, oh, what it was like sunny skies at night or whatever the weird, adage was.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I should, it's worth clarifying that, like, when I say that I like to use a lot of things, like, specifically that I'm good at, like, that is a preference, not a rule of just, like, I don't find it very satisfying to play characters that I'm, like, wholly unlike and, like, have no relatable skills to. Like, some people love that. Some people live for that, and that's great. So it's just, a lot of that does come down to preference of, like, I would almost never be the guy who's like, yeah, I know nothing about philosophy, but I'm going to play a philosophy major because I think it'll be interesting to explore that. Like, hey, by all means, have at it. And then you can do those sorts of tips and they'll work great. But it's just like, that makes it really difficult for me in the way that I play to connect with them, in the same sort of way that like sharing something with them does. So it kind of all comes down to, at the end of the day, what drives the most like interest and connection for you personally. And kind of exploring different avenues and trying different things out of like, this game I am going to play a guy who's just like me, but in that world. But in this game, I'm going to try someone who's like totally not. I'm going to like focus on expositing and describing rather than trying to like role play personally. And like exploration for me is like almost always a plus of like one time, just try it out, see how it feels, and worst case scenario is it'll immediately be apparent of like, oh, nope, that's not going to work. And then you can kind of lean back on your usual methods. But yeah, there's so many different ways to approach from. There's bound to be at least a couple that are definitely going to like really connect.
Yeah, I definitely think that's worth saying as well, where it's important to note that any character I've made, if it ended up being compelling through the course of the game, did not start that way. So for me, a big tip would be don't set out trying to make an interesting character. Remember that you're setting you're deciding a lot less. And that for me, a lot of the fun is in exploring what they are. And by the end of the first session, not only may they be different than when I started, but then by the end of the second session, even some of the decisions I made in the first session might be different. The simplest example is I try out voices in the first session. I'm not necessarily someone that will try a voice beforehand and then bring it all ready. I will have 3 different accents, or different voices, styles of voice in the first session, and then decide on one in the second one, because we are still playing a game and we're still discovering that. And never, ever, ever once has somebody said, hey, that's a different voice. You can't do that. In fact, never has anyone said that's a different voice. Not only are they worrying about all their own stuff, but that doesn't really matter, because by the third session, everybody remembers the first session as whoever you are now. So it's just important to remember that if you don't feel like you're creating compelling characters, remember that a lot of it happens in the game. I don't write a ton of backstory for my characters, and I don't think too much about them. I like the on-the-fly, oh my gosh, what would they do? Because it almost removes some of the decision-making from me, and that part is so much fun. And it's just, consider that. Consider embracing that chaos of not knowing and making those decisions, because you can always lean on, well, I was thinking about this, but what do you guys think of that? And then deciding what your character would do and then saying, oh, that's what they do. And now you've made a compelling character, but you got a chance to kind of mull it over.
Yeah, there is something to be said for like finding the instinctive path of least resistance for like who you end up finding to be the character through the game, rather than, because I've seen a lot of instances where people will have a very specific idea of who the character is in mind before they start playing, and then like immediately in session 1 it becomes obviously apparent that that's not going to work, where it's just like, I had all these plans for this voice, for this personality, and it's just not gelling with the party, it's not gelling with the campaign. And if you get too locked in to all that ahead of time, where it's like, no, this is who I am, full stop, 100%, I think you can potentially lock yourself into a difficult spot, where the sort of approach that James says is very much similar to mine, of like, this is kind of the general idea, but if I think that I'm going to be super snappy and quippy and talkative going into the game, and then suddenly the game hits and that doesn't feel right, maybe because somebody else is kind of already filling that role, or it just doesn't really, my mood that day just isn't very talkative that day, and a lot of that can just kind of like letting that flow happen, I think is like totally okay to do. And I think will more often help you than it will hurt you, because you can kind of slot into what feels right in that game, rather than like going in with something that's not going to fit and trying to like really force it to work.
Yeah, and I think, that's probably a good place to sort of bring it to a close, which is by saying all of these things are right given the right scenario. And so when you're learning something, I know most people are like, just tell me how to do it. And that's fair. And so pick any of those ways that feels right at the moment. But if I said to James, how do you cook? I feel like your next question would be like, well, cook what? And it's like...
Exactly, like not a specific enough question.
Right. So how do you make a character? And it's like, well, let's use that. Let's just beat that analogy to bruised pulp and say, attack it from that perspective, which is, okay, it is not so simple a question. For this particular set of ingredients, or for this particular day, I'm trying to get this particular meal, what do I want to do? If you have a game that is calling for X and Y, you wouldn't say, well, hey, like if I have a big old thing of chicken, I'm not going to look up a beef recipe. Or, you know what I mean? So my point is, in the moment that you have to make the character, choose. Start, and you can have that in the same way that Jeff recommends it during the game. Start by saying, all right, how am I going to make this character? And that's okay. It's okay for your default position to be, I'm going to just see what works best for me right now today in this game. For this game. Don't make your character during the game. But so that would be my thing, is attack it from the question of what method is right for right now. And it's totally okay, and it will change probably from character to character, and that's okay. So tell us, what do you do? How do you make your characters, and what do you do to give them depth? What's your process? Do you give him a big old honking backstory? Does that work for you? Do you find that that's limiting? What is the deal? Put it in the comments below. And then just remember, we're Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and tabletop RPGs. If you like those kinds of things, hit the subscribe button, and then be sure to hit the notification bell so you know when we post a new video. And I guess we'll end it by role-playing a toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
And may you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.